Hi, folks. This is Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D. for the Institute for Dialectical Meta-Realism. Depending upon your point of view, the capturing of Ukraine by the empire from Russia could be compared to the events of 1953, when the U.S. went into Iran, overthrew the legitimately and democratically elected president of Iran, Mossadegh, and put into power Shah Pahlavi. Both were despicable acts, and both earned condemnation. People who have wondered why in 1979, during the revolution in Iran, so many Iranians went out onto the street and chanted, "America is the great Satan." That is why. People in their own countries generally share a memory which often is not shared by the rest of the world. Whatever, again, your views are on the war between Russia and Ukraine, and the fact that American imperialism basically is responsible for that war, and more broadly, First World imperialism, the imperialism of the empire itself, is responsible for that war. What happened today is an act of imperialism which I don't think can ever be forgiven. Russia bombed a children's cancer hospital in Kyiv, Ukraine, today. Many, many people were killed, adults and children. The exact tally is not yet known, and I imagine it will be a while before we have those figures that we can report. Still, it is tragic and it is unforgivable. No matter what war you are involved in, children are never the enemy. Children are always children, and they should be treated as if they are your own children. When I look at the faces of children anywhere, I cannot think that child, because that child comes from a country which is my enemy, is my enemy. No, that is never acceptable. Any person of conscience, any individual with even a hint of a moral compass cannot tolerate that type of action, or cannot tolerate that type of perspective. Children can never be intentional casualties of a war. Unintentional? Well, they are unintentional. But when a cancer hospital for children is directly attacked by a country, that is not unintentional. No matter what anyone says, no matter what anyone tells you, "Oh, we're sorry, it was a mistake." Do not be deceived. It was no mistake. That hospital was targeted. Those children were killed intentionally. It was a massacre which, as someone who loves children but has never had any of his own, because I am an autistic and I have never been married, I find so heartbreaking that even talking about it right now is difficult. I needed to prepare myself adequately before making this episode of the podcast, and I did. But still, even with that, when I look at the photographs of this hospital, a very beautiful hospital or medical center, one which existed to care for children. The bombing of that hospital was nothing but imperialism. Imperialism is not limited to the American empire. Russian imperialism, Saudi imperialism, and other types of imperialism are also a reality in the world that we live in today, sadly. Sadly. There are many countries which are trying to build empires. Sometimes it is a reaction to American imperialism. Countries that are trying to keep up with the US, that are battling against the US. So, on one level, perhaps we can understand why there might be these other imperialisms in the world. But that is different from bombing a children's cancer hospital. That is a line that no one can ever cross. And yet, it was a line which today was crossed by Vladimir Putin. And for it, he should never, ever be forgiven. Whatever sympathies one may have for the fact that Ukraine, a country which was allied with Russia, a country which borders Russia, was taken over, in effect, by NATO, was conquered by NATO. I mean, imagine if Russia came in and conquered Mexico or conquered Canada. How would we feel? Remember the Turkish-Cuban Missile Crisis. How did Kennedy respond to that? There was a possibility of a nuclear war. I remember the Turkish-Cuban Missile Crisis vividly, and we were all terrified of what might happen, even though I was only in elementary school. So I am sympathetic to the complaints of Russia, but I am not sympathetic to Russia when it bombs a children's cancer hospital. That can never be tolerated. It is a war crime of the greatest proportions imaginable. And the fact that Russia is now facing international condemnations is correct. Sadly, there is not much more that can be done. We have no sovereign global government. The United Nations is weak. It really has no power except for the power of its words. So nothing at this point can be done to stand up for those children who are now deceased. But those people who did this will have to live with themselves, and I hope they have a conscience. I hope they have a sense of shame. Not everyone does, because if they do, they will live with this memory, with this pain for the rest of their lives, what they themselves did. No one forced them to do that. If you are in the military and you are ordered to commit a war crime, it is a war crime to follow that order. And so you can't. And yet that is precisely what just happened. A war crime was committed, and unfortunately, there is literally no recourse. For the time being, this has been Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D., for the Institute for Dialectical Meta-Realism. Have a pleasant day and an even better day tomorrow.